and welcome. I'm Kara Scrivener, and today I'm going to be doing my second annual Authors I Want to Read in the Next Year. Last year I decided rather than picking specific books for my TBR, I would instead have authors and kind of decide that I wanted to read more of them. There are authors that I have read very little of or none at all. And my first author on here is George Orwell. I've actually read 2 of his books, and that being Animal Farm, which is my first book I ever read by him, and I really enjoy the social commentary on it. I think that is very nuanced and kind of applicable no matter where you are. I have my very specific own readings of it, but the same as 1984, it can be kind of deciphered and discussed by a lot of different parties and a lot of different stances, which is really cool as well. Even though interesting that he can do that so well, even though he had very specific views on that throughout his life. But 1984 was a book that I didn't love as much. I think that I would have preferred reading it when I was in high school, because by the time I read it, I could appreciate the history and the development and the influence it had, but it didn't hit the way it had because it was familiar to me, which is kind of when something is so influential that it becomes commonplace in the future to be able to understand it, then that shows a lot. But it does take away the experience and the impact of that novel. I'm really excited to read 2 of his first novels that deal a lot with social justice and his own experiences, though fictionalized. The first one is Down and Out in London and Paris, and this kind of covers his experience of living on the streets and having his own real stories of what it was like. He never actually had to live on the streets because of poverty. He did it rather than kind of using his wealth, and he would go in between his parents' house and living on the street, and he would journal and write, and this is during the time that he was really trying to become a writer in his own. And then we also have Burmese Days, and this kind of covers his story of when he was living in Burma. Though it's fictionalized, it deals with his own struggles of wanting to befriend Burmese people, but also having the disconnect because he had privilege over them as a white man, but also not connecting with his fellow soldiers because he felt that they were oppressors. And I think that even in our own time, we don't necessarily look at the idea of oppression and realizing our own privilege as much. And though this book is 90 years old, I think that it has a lot to say to our own current world and how we look at ourselves in this world. And I'm very excited. There are also several other books by him that just seem really interesting and cool, and I'm hoping to read many of them. Then we have J.R.R. Tolkien. It is kind of sad at this point that I haven't read The Lord of the Rings. I read The Hobbit twice, once when I was a child and once when I was an adult about 2 years ago, and it's just sad. This is like a really vintage set that my sister gave me, specifically trying to guilt me into reading it. There's nothing against it, it's just I tried to read it when I was still learning how to read well as a dyslexic kid, and it was just too much for me, and then I just put it off, and it became the thing that like it's always going to be there, so I don't need to read it. It's like there's so many other books I'm going to read first, and I know I'm going to enjoy it. I read the first part of The Fellowship, and it's really good. So this is the year I'm going to get through this, and there's nothing holding me. I haven't even watched the movies because I made a solemn oath to my siblings that I would not spoil it. And in the last year or so, I have been spoiled because, you know, people don't give spoiler alerts when they talk about Lord of the Rings, and it makes me sad because it's only my own fault. But as I think, as someone who wants to write epic fantasy and is writing epic fantasy, this is just sad that I haven't read it. So we are going to remedy this year in 2020. Now we have our first repeat from last year, and that is Leigh Bardugo. I have a weird, interesting relationship with Leigh Bardugo. Most people have read the Grishevers and haven't read much else because she didn't have that much, but I read Wonder Woman about 2.5 years ago, and I really enjoyed it. I thought the friendships were really well done, and it had great representation. Currently, I'm reading Ninth House. It's definitely very dark, but it is also really well written. I have not read anything from the Grishevers, and I'm excited for the TV show coming out. I think that especially The Six of Crows is just, I love heists, and I went to read it literally on my very first TBR when I started BookTube, but then I was like, I need to read the Grisha trilogy, and it's never like super like something I've super wanted to read, but I am going to do it this year. This is a solemn oath. My greatest attempt is going to be finishing this, and I need encouragement. I am really excited to be reading N.K. Jemisin this year. I have been putting it off for a really long time. I've been really excited about the Broken Earth trilogy, and I have only heard better things as the year has gone by. I'm also really excited about her new book, The City We Became, which is focusing on New York and I don't know everything else. I just remember hearing her talk about it and it sounding really interesting, and I probably should have totally looked that up before I talked to you about it. But I am all here to support people of color as they write incredibly well written and well constructed novels. I've heard N.K. Jemisin speak several times in person and on videos, and I'm just always impressed by her love and her care and her intelligence. So I am very excited to dive into her works. And then another repeat, the Bronte sisters. I still haven't read any of the Bronte sisters. I have the majority of their works on my shelves for the last 2.5 years, and what have I done with my time? Not read them. I'm very interested in their plots. I began Wuthering Heights. It's, I think, not as much for me, but Jane Eyre, I'm really excited to read. I'm really excited especially to read The Tenant of Wildfell Hill, Shirley, some of the ones that deal a lot with social commentary. I'm excited, I am thrilled, and yet again, they're books that I always feel like they'll always be there, but I want to especially read a lot more classics, especially on paper and physically this year, and I'm really excited to dive into these powerful women who wrote stories that were poignant and were before their time and really crafted what English and language and what feminism and women writers are. And I'm just happy, and we're gonna do this year. We're gonna try. At risk of being too repetitively, we do have our last repeat, and this is Brandon Sanderson. I read Mistborn in May of 2018. I really, really loved it. I thought The Final Empire was well constructed and beautifully, beautifully written and delivered, and I'm really excited to continue on. The Well of Ascension is actually holding up my phone at this point because, you know, we don't have stands here, and I figured that if I removed it, then the whole, like, video would be at different angles. So we're stuck with The Way of Kings, which I'm really excited to get to hopefully soon. I'm hoping to get The Well of Ascension done by the first 2 months of the new year, and then we will move on to this after we're done the trilogy. Warbreaker sounds really great, like, funny, and it's a standalone, and then there's Elantris, which also sounds kind of like dungeony and good and lovely, and there's also his YA books that are, like, well praised. I'm just excited to read more of this mammoth of an author who is just really intelligent and well constructed, and I really admire a lot despite the fact that I haven't read more than one of his. And then last but surely not least, we have Terry Pratchett, and I'm really excited to read the Bromeliad hopefully by the end of the year, and this is a collection of 3 books, which is following Christmas elves as they try to rebel against their store because they just don't want to be in the store anymore, and it's absurdist and small scale, but, you know, huge dramaticness, and I'm excited for that, and I am excited to read Good Omens. My library finally got a copy when the TV show came out, and I also am really excited to do Discworld. I've heard especially good things about the Death character, and I really love Death, and I'm really hoping to dive into the world that is really well acclaimed and assertist and has a lot of social commentary, and I think that I will respect Terry Pratchett a lot. He sounds like an author that I would really, really admire, and kind of some lines of how I like writing. So those are the authors that I am excited to read in 2020. Let me know which authors are on your top list to read throughout this year, coming year, and let me know if you agree with my choices. Are there any authors that I should have on my list to read more of? And in the end, I hope that you have happy reading and writing and a grand day. Goodbye.